A father's love is supposed to be a shield, but for 22-year-old Clara Blackwood, it was a gilded cage, and on a blistering Arizona afternoon, it became a weapon. In the heart of their picturesque town, her father, a man of immense power and influence, unleashed a brutal assault on his own pregnant daughter in the middle of Main Street. The town watched, frozen in shock. No one dared to intervene. That is until the lone, dusty figure of a stranger stepped out from the shadows. This isn't just a story of a rescue. It's the story of how one man's quiet courage, a loaded revolver, and a single moment of defiance brought an entire corrupt empire crashing to the ground. Prescott Creek, Arizona was a town that sold postcards of itself. Nestled in a valley of sun-scorched rock and stubborn pines, its main street was a carefully curated facade of Old West charm and modern boutique wealth. Tourists loved the polished brass fixtures on the saloon doors and the art galleries tucked into what were once assay offices. But for the people who lived there, the town's true currency wasn't its charm, it was its hierarchy. And at the very top of that hierarchy sat Alistair Blackwood. Alistair was the founder and CEO of Blackwood Construction, a man who had carved the modern face of Prescott Creek out of the desert with steel and concrete. He'd built the new municipal center, the sprawling golf resort on the mesa, and the gated community where he resided, in a house that looked less like a home and more like a fortress of glass and stone. He was a man of cold, impeccable tailoring, and even colder eyes, a patriarch who ruled his family with the same ruthless precision he used to survey a plot of land. His daughter Clara Blackwood was his prized possession. At 22, she had her mother's classic beauty, a cascade of dark chestnut hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. But where her mother Eleanor had long ago been worn down into a state of quiet, anxious compliance, Clara still possessed a flicker of defiance that her father found both infuriating and necessary for the dynasty he envisioned. She was a Blackwood, and a Blackwood was meant to be strong, but she was to be strong on his terms. Her life was a meticulously planned blueprint. The right schools, the right friends, the right hobbies. Her future was already laid out, a strategic marriage to Marcus Thorne, the vapid but well-connected son of a Phoenix real estate mogul. The union would solidify Alistair's expansion plans, merging the Thorne fortune with the Blackwood empire. It was a deal, not a romance, and Clara was the non-negotiable clause. But love, as it often does, had scribbled its own messy, beautiful notes all over Alistair's clean blueprint. His name was Leo Martinez. He was the lead mechanic at Desert Rat Auto, a garage on the less glamorous side of town, where the air smelled of gasoline and honest work. He had grease under his fingernails and a smile that could disarm a bomb. Clara had met him when her pristine, company-leased BMW had sputtered to a halt on a dusty back road. He'd shown up in his tow truck, not with the deference she was used to, but with a friendly, teasing confidence that she found intoxicating. Their love affair was a secret garden, cultivated in the arid landscape of her life. They met in hushed diners, 50 miles out of town, went for hikes in canyons, where no one would recognize her, and talked for hours in his small, cluttered apartment above the garage. With Leo, Clara wasn't Alistair Blackwood's daughter. She was just Clara. She could laugh too loud, eat pizza with her hands, and talk about her dream of being a botanist, a dream her father had dismissed as a pointless hobby. For 6 months, she lived a double life. Then came the 2 pink lines on a plastic stick, a confirmation that would either be a declaration of love or a declaration of war. For Clara, holding the positive pregnancy test in her trembling hands, it felt like both. The child inside her was a product of love, a tiny testament to the one part of her life that was truly her own. But she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that to her father, this baby would be seen as the ultimate act of betrayal, a stain on the family name, the demolition of his grand design. She and Leo made a plan. They would save up what they could. He'd look for a better-paying job in Flagstaff or even California. They would leave Prescott Creek and the long, cold shadow of her father behind. But first she had to tell him. It was a terrifying prospect, but it felt like the only honorable thing to do. She owed him the truth, even if she knew he would use it to destroy her. The air in the Blackwood mansion was always still and cool, recycled, and sterile, a stark contrast to the vibrant living heat outside. That evening the tension was thick enough to taste. Her mother Eleanor drifted through the cavernous living room, like a ghost straightening coasters that were already perfectly aligned her face, a mask of practiced neutrality. She knew something was wrong. A mother always knows. Alistair was in his study, a room of dark wood leather and smoked glass, a mausoleum for his ambition. Clara stood at the door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She took a deep breath, the scent of her father's expensive scotch and cigar smoke filling her lungs, and she walked in. "Father," she began, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. "I need to talk to you." He didn't look up from the financial reports spread across his massive oak desk. "Is this about the arrangements for the Thorn Gala? I've already confirmed the caterers. We will be serving the Chilean sea bass. No, it's not about the gala." She clutched her stomach, a subconscious gesture of protection. "I'm not going to the gala, and I'm not going to marry Marcus Thorn." That got his attention. His head snapped up. His eyes, the color of slate, narrowed into slits. He placed his pen down with deliberate, menacing slowness. "What did you just say?" The dam of her courage broke, and the words tumbled out about Leo, about their love, about their plans to leave. She left out the pregnancy, saving the most crucial piece for last, hoping to soften him first with the truth of her feelings. It was a foolish hope. Alistair's face remained unnervingly calm, but a vein throbbed at his temple. Leo Martinez, the grease monkey from that hovel off the highway. You are throwing away a multi-million-dollar merger for a boy who changes tires. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "This is a childish fantasy, Clara. You will end it. Tonight." "No," she whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down her cheek. "I love him." "Love." He scoffed the word, tasting like poison in his mouth. "You know nothing of the sort. You know only of duty of legacy. You are a Blackwood. You will call Marcus, you will apologize for this temporary insanity, and you will forget this ever happened." Her defiance, that tiny flickering flame, finally roared to life. "I can't, and I won't, because it's not just about me and Leo anymore." She took a steadying breath, her hand resting firmly on her belly. "I'm pregnant." The room went silent. The sterile, recycled air seemed to crackle. For a moment, Alistair didn't move, his face a blank canvas. Then, a dark, terrifying transformation occurred. The mask of the calculating businessman dissolved, replaced by something primal and full of rage. He rose from his chair, his 6'3" frame seeming to suck all the oxygen from the room. "You... what?" He breathed the words low and dangerous. "I'm pregnant," she repeated, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm going to have his baby." He rounded the desk, his movements like a predator closing in. The calm was gone, shattered into a million pieces of incandescent fury. His face was a contorted mask of disgust. "You have ruined everything," he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage so profound it seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. "You have shamed me. You have shamed this family. You have brought gutter trash into my legacy." "It's not trash, it's my child," she cried, backing away until her shoulders hit the cold, hard wall. "That thing," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at her stomach, "is not my grandchild. It is a mistake, a cancer you will cut out." The sheer horror of his words stole her breath. This was a side of her father she had only seen in glimpses, a terrifying, violent temper, usually reserved for incompetent contractors or business rivals. Now it was aimed squarely at her, and her unborn child. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. "You will get rid of it. Do you understand me? You will make an appointment tomorrow." "No! Never!" she screamed, trying to wrench her arm away. His control snapped completely. With a guttural roar, he shoved her. She stumbled backward, catching herself on a bookshelf. Books and a crystal vase crashed to the floor. From the doorway she saw her mother, her hand clapped over her mouth, her eyes wide with a familiar, paralyzing terror. She did nothing. She never did anything. "Get out!" Alistair bellowed, his face purple with rage. "Get out of my house! You are no daughter of mine! You are nothing!" He dragged her from the study through the pristine foyer and threw open the massive front door. He hurled her purse after her onto the manicured lawn. Clara stumbled, landing hard on her hands and knees, tears of shock and pain streaming down her face. The heavy door slammed shut, the sound echoing in the twilight stillness. The automatic sprinklers hissed to life, their cold spray soaking her clothes. She was alone, disowned, and standing at the precipice of a nightmare she was only just beginning to understand. The night was a blur of shame and fear. Clara didn't go to Leo's. She couldn't bear for him to see her like this, broken and cast out. More than that, she was terrified of what her father might do if he found him. Alistair Blackwood did not make idle threats. Instead, she checked into the Canyon View Motel on the edge of town, a cheap, anonymous place with flickering fluorescent lights and threadbare carpets. She paid in cash and huddled under the thin blanket, her body aching and her mind replaying the monstrous look in her father's eyes over and over again. Sleep offered no escape. Her dreams were filled with falling of cold water, of her father's voice roaring her name. She awoke the next morning to a dull ache in her abdomen and a resolve that had hardened overnight in the crucible of her fear. She wasn't just fighting for herself or for Leo anymore. She was fighting for the tiny, innocent life inside her. Her first priority was practical. Her father controlled her bank accounts. The BMW was a company car. The purse he'd thrown at her contained her wallet, but only a couple $100 in cash. She needed her personal belongings, her birth certificate, her passport, things she couldn't leave behind. Steeling herself, she drove her car, a car that felt like stolen property, now to downtown Prescott Creek. She parked a block away from the Blackwood building, the gleaming steel and glass tower that housed her father's corporate offices. Her plan was simple. Go to the family lawyer Arthur Pembroke, whose office was on the second floor. Arthur had known her since she was a child. He was a gentle, aging man who had always shown her kindness. Surely he would help her mediate to at least arrange for her personal effects to be collected from the house. It was a naive hope, born of a desperate desire to believe that some piece of her old life was still salvageable. As she walked down Main Street, the mid-morning sun was already baking the pavement. The town was alive with its usual rhythm, tourists snapping photos, locals greeting each other outside the bakery. To them she was still Clara Blackwood, the town princess. They smiled and waved. She could barely manage a weak smile in return, feeling like an imposter. The weight of her secret of her father's monstrous rejection felt like a physical shroud. She found Arthur Pembroke's office, but his secretary, a woman who had cooed over her childhood drawings, looked at her with pity and fear. "Clara, dear." "I'm so sorry," the woman Martha stammered. "Mr. Pembroke can't see you. Your father called this morning. He gave specific instructions." The blood drained from Clara's face. "Instructions? What instructions?" Martha wouldn't meet her eyes. "That no one from any firm associated with Blackwood Construction is to offer you any assistance, legal, financial, or otherwise. I'm so sorry." The walls of the office seemed to close in. He had already excommunicated her not just from the family, but from the entire network of power he controlled. Every door was being slammed in her face before she even had a chance to knock. Defeated, she turned and left the secretary's whispered apology, following her into the hallway. She stood on the sidewalk disoriented, the sun glaring in her eyes. What now? She pulled out her phone to call Leo, to tell him it was worse than she had imagined, that they had to leave right now, with whatever they could carry. That's when she saw him. Alistair Blackwood's black Lincoln Navigator, polished to a mirror shine, pulled up to the curb directly in front of her. The passenger door opened, and her father emerged. He wasn't dressed in his usual bespoke suit. He wore dark slacks and a polo shirt, but he looked more menacing than he ever had in his boardroom attire. His face was a thundercloud of controlled fury. "You were told to leave town," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "I needed to see Arthur. I need my things from the house," Clara said, her voice trembling as she backed away. People on the sidewalk were beginning to notice their steps, slowing their gazes, lingering. "The things in that house are mine. You have nothing," he said, advancing on her. "I gave you a simple instruction. One last chance to handle this with a shred of dignity. You were to go to the clinic in Scottsdale. I made the appointment myself, but you're still here, defying me. I am not getting rid of my baby." She cried, her voice rising with a mix of terror and righteous anger. "You can't make me." The public nature of her defiance was the final spark on the powder keg. For Alistair Blackwood, image was everything. To be challenged by his own daughter on Main Street, in front of the very people he ruled over, was an intolerable offense. His face contorted into the same mask of rage she had seen in his study. "You insolent girl!" he roared, and he lunged forward. He grabbed the front of her blouse, yanking her toward him. "You will learn to obey me." She struggled, pushing against his chest. "Let go of me. You're crazy." The struggle sent them stumbling from the sidewalk into the street, into an empty parking space. A car honked. People gasped. Time seemed to slow down. Alistair, blinded by rage, saw only the source of his humiliation. His daughter, her defiant belly. He shoved her away from him, hard. Clara lost her footing on the asphalt and fell backward, landing with a painful jolt on her hip. The shock of the fall sent a starburst of pain through her body. She cried out instinctively, curling into a ball, her hands flying to her abdomen to protect her child. For any normal person, the sight of their pregnant daughter on the ground would have been a moment of horror, a snap back to sanity. For Alistair, it was a trigger for something even darker. He saw her not as his child, but as a vessel of rebellion, and he was going to crush it. "You want to keep that thing," he screamed, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent street. "You want to ruin this family for that bastard child." He stepped forward, and he kicked her. It wasn't a tentative or accidental blow. It was a full, vicious kick, his hard-soled dress shoe connecting with her side just above her hip. Clara screamed a raw animal sound of agony and terror. The pain was blinding, But the psychological horror was worse. Her father. Her own father was trying to kill her baby. He drew his foot back again. "I will not let you destroy my name." He kicked her again, this time in the thigh, as she tried to scramble away. The crowd of onlookers was paralyzed, a gallery of horrified, impotent statues. They saw it happen. They heard her screams. But this was Alistair Blackwood. To interfere was to invite his wrath, to risk your job, your mortgage, your place in the town's delicate ecosystem. So they watched. Clara, sobbing on the hot black asphalt, looked up through a haze of tears and saw his foot raise for a third time, aimed directly at her stomach. This was it. He was going to kill them both. She closed her eyes, a final, desperate prayer on her lips. Jackson Jack's rider was a man defined by the road behind him. For the past 5 years, home had been the worn cab of his dusty Ford F-250 and a string of cheap motels from Montana to Texas. He was a former rodeo cowboy, his career cut short by a shattered femur, courtesy of a bull named Widowmaker. Now he drifted, taking work on ranches during branding season, or doing short-haul trucking, anything that kept him moving and paid in cash. He was tall and lean, with the kind of sun-weathered face that made it hard to guess his age. He could have been 30 or 45. His eyes were a pale, piercing blue, and they held a perpetual weariness, the look of a man who had seen too much and slept too little. He moved with a quiet, deliberate economy, his old leather jacket and worn boots, his unchanging uniform. Jax had rolled into Prescott Creek the night before, his truck needing a new alternator. He'd left it with Leo Martinez at Desert Rat Auto, the young mechanic striking him as one of the few honest ones he'd met in a long time. He was just passing through, planning to be gone as soon as the truck was fixed, another town in his rearview mirror. That morning he was sitting in a corner booth at the Dusty Spoon, a diner directly across the street from the Blackwood building. He was nursing a mug of black coffee, watching the town wake up. He had a knack for observation, a habit born from years of solitude. He could read the subtle currents of a place, the unspoken hierarchies, the simmering tensions beneath a placid surface. And Prescott Creek, for all its polished charm, felt brittle to him. He could see it in the way people deferred to certain cars, the way they spoke in hushed tones when a man in a sharp suit walked by. He had noticed Clara the moment she walked past the diner window. He didn't know who she was, but he saw the tension in her shoulders, the fear in the set of her jaw. She looked like a ghost, haunting her own life. He watched her go into the big, imposing office building and come out minutes later, her face etched with a despair that was painful to witness. Then he saw the black Lincoln Navigator pull up. He saw the big man get out, radiating an aura of arrogant power that Jax recognized instantly. It was a universal type men who believed the world was their personal property. He watched their confrontation, his hand pausing on his coffee mug. He couldn't hear their words through the diner's plate glass window, but he could read the body language perfectly. The man's escalating aggression, the young woman's terrified retreat. When the man shoved her into the street, Jax was already on his feet, a $5 bill dropped on the table. When the man kicked her as she lay on the ground, a switch flipped in Jax's soul. A cold, white-hot rage, cold as a winter river and hot as a branding iron, washed through him. It was a familiar feeling, an old ghost he had tried to outrun for 1,000 miles, because he had seen this before. Not here, not on this street, but years ago, in a cramped apartment that smelled of stale beer and regret. He'd seen the bruises on his younger sister Sarah. He'd listened to her excuses, her promises that he was just having a bad day. He had wanted to believe her, had hesitated to interfere in her marriage. That hesitation had cost Sarah her life. He'd found her after her husband had put her through a wall. The official report said she fell. Jax knew better. He carried that failure, that soul-deep guilt with him every single day. It was the engine that kept him moving, the ghost that rode shotgun in his truck. He had made a vow over his sister's grave, never again. Never again would he stand by and do nothing. He was out the diner door in 3 long strides, his boots eating up the pavement. The scene was frozen in a tableau of horror. The screaming girl on the ground, the enraged man with his foot, raised the silent, watching crowd. They were all complicit, their silence a form of consent. Jax didn't shout. He didn't run. He moved with the deadly calm of a man who had made a decision. His hand went to the small of his back, to the worn leather holster tucked into his jeans. In it sat a Colt Pythoner, .357 Magnum with a 6-inch barrel, a relic from his grandfather. It was heavy and solid and real. As Alistair Blackwood drew his foot back for the 3rd, potentially fatal kick, a sound cut through the air, sharp and distinct, and utterly final. Click. It was the sound of a revolver's hammer being cocked. The sound was shockingly loud in the stunned silence of the street. It was a sound that belonged in one of the Old West movies, filmed in the canyons outside town, not here on this pristine, modern street. Alistair Blackwood froze his foot hovering in the air. He slowly turned his head, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Standing not 10 feet away from him was a stranger, a drifter by the looks of him, dusty boots, worn jeans, a faded leather jacket despite the heat. But it was the object in the man's hand that held Alistair's attention. The Colt Python was levelled at his chest, held in a 2-handed grip that was rock steady. The stranger's pale blue eyes were as cold and hard as the polished steel of the weapon. There was no anger in them, no fear. There was only a chilling, absolute certainty. Get away from her. Jax's voice was low, a gravelly rumble that carried an unmistakable weight of command. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact, the verbal equivalent of the cocked hammer. For a moment, Alistair couldn't process it. He, Alistair Blackwood, was being challenged, threatened, in his town. By this nobody. His arrogance warred with the primal instinct of self-preservation that stared back at him from the dark, round hole at the end of the barrel. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Alistair snarled, a reflexive assertion of his power. "I don't care," Jax replied, his voice flat, his aim unwavering. "I know what I see, and I see a coward hitting a woman on the ground. Now I'm going to say it one last time. Back away from her. Slowly." The crowd, which had been a collection of frozen individuals, now became a single collective entity, holding its breath. Someone in the back finally had the presence of mind to fumble for their phone and dial 911. Clara, still on the pavement, looked up. Through her pain-filled, tear-blurred vision, she saw the silhouette of the man standing between her and her father. He was like a figure from a legend, a guardian angel smelling of dust and coffee. He hadn't just stopped the attack. He had shattered the illusion of her father's invincibility. Alistair, for the first time in perhaps his entire adult life, was not in control. The gun was a great equalizer. His money, his influence, his name, they were all useless against a .357 Magnum slug. He made a calculation. The rage was still burning in his gut, but the cold businessman in him took over. He slowly, grudgingly lowered his foot. He took one step back, then another, his hands raised in a mocking gesture of surrender. "You're a dead man." Alistair hissed, his eyes promising retribution that a bullet couldn't stop. "When the sheriff gets here, you're going to be arrested for assault with a deadly weapon. You'll rot in a cell. Maybe," Jax said, his eyes never leaving Alistair, "but she'll be alive, and so will her baby." The mention of the baby seemed to stoke Alistair's rage anew, but before he could say another word, the distant wail of a siren began to grow, piercing the tense quiet. The sound broke the spell. The crowd began to murmur, people stepping back, others craning their necks to see. Jax kept the gun trained on Alistair until the first police cruiser, a black and white from the Prescott Creek Sheriff's Department, screeched to a halt, its lights painting the street in strobing blues and reds. 2 deputies emerged, their hands on their own holstered weapons. "Drop the gun now," the younger one yelled. Jax didn't look at them. His focus remained entirely on Alistair. "I will," he said, his voice calm and clear, "as soon as you have him in custody. Drop the weapon now. That's your last warning." From the crowd, a woman's voice suddenly shouted, "He saved her. That man was kicking her. He was kicking that poor pregnant girl." Another voice joined in. "It's true, I saw it. Blackwood just went crazy." The spell of fear was broken. The truth, witnessed by 24 people, was bubbling to the surface. Sheriff Brody arrived in the second car. He was a thick-set man in his late 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen it all. He took in the scene with a quick, practiced glance, Alistair Blackwood, the most powerful man in the county, being held at bay, a stranger with a cannon of a handgun, and Clara Blackwood, curled on the asphalt, sobbing. An ambulance was already pulling up behind him. "Rider right," Brody said, approaching slowly, his hand raised in a placating gesture. "Your truck's over at Martinez's garage. I saw it this morning." He knew how to de-escalate. "Son, I see what's happening here, but you got to put the gun down. Let's not make this worse than it is." Jax looked at Brody. He saw a professional, not just a small-town cop on a rich man's payroll. He gave a slight nod. Keeping his eyes on Alistair, he slowly, deliberately uncocked the hammer on the python, bent down, and placed the weapon on the ground. He kicked it gently away and raised his hands. The moment he was disarmed, the deputies moved in, pushing him against the side of the police cruiser. Alistair's smug, triumphant sneer returned. "See, I told you. Lock him up, Sheriff. He pulled a gun on me." But Sheriff Brody wasn't looking at Jax. He was looking at the 12 different cell phones that were now raised, all recording. He was looking at Clara being gently helped onto a stretcher by paramedics. And he was looking at the faces in the crowd, fearful, yes, but also angry. "Alistair," Brody said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I've got 20 witnesses saying you assaulted your daughter, that you kicked a pregnant woman in the street." "They're mistaken," Alistair blustered. "It was a family disagreement. She fell. This maniac came out of nowhere and threatened my life. We'll sort it out," Brody said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned to one of his deputies. "Cuff him." The deputy looked stunned. "Sir, you mean Mr. Blackwood?" "You heard me," Brody said. "Assault, for now." The triumphant look on Alistair Blackwood's face vanished, replaced by sheer, sputtering disbelief as the cold steel of handcuffs snapped around his wrists. The sound was as definitive as the cocking of Jax's revolver. As the paramedics loaded Clara into the ambulance, her eyes met Jax's. He was leaning against the cruiser, not in cuffs, but clearly being detained. Through her pain, she mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Jax gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He had kept his promise to a ghost. The consequences, whatever they were, would have to wait. The Prescott Creek General Hospital was a low, sand-colored building that, like most things in town, had been built by Blackwood Construction. The irony was not lost on Clara as she lay in a sterile room, the rhythmic beep of a fetal heart monitor, the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Dr. Annabeth Ross, a kind woman with gentle hands, had confirmed it. The baby was shaken, but stable. A fighter. Clara had a severely bruised hip and a fractured rib, but the life she had fought to protect was for now safe. Leo burst into the room an hour later, his face pale with panic, his work shirt stained with grease. Jax had called him from the sheriff's station, a brief, no-nonsense call. "Clara's at the hospital. She's okay. Her father isn't." "Clara, oh my God!" Leo breathed, rushing to her bedside and taking her hand. He looked at the bruises forming on her skin, his eyes filling with a mixture of anguish and fury. "I'm going to kill him, I swear to God, Clara, I'm going to kill him." "No," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "We're not going to be like him. We're going to be better." The legal storm was already gathering. Alistair Blackwood had been booked for felony assault, but he was out on bail in under 2 hours, the $500,000 bond posted by a bondsman who practically bowed as he left the station. Alistair's first call had been to his real lawyer, a shark from Phoenix named Donovan Finch, who immediately began spinning a narrative for the press, a concerned father, an emotionally unstable daughter, a tragic misunderstanding complicated by an armed violent transient. At the station, Sheriff Brody led Jax into his cluttered office. The air smelled of stale coffee and paperwork. He handed Jax a cup. "I'm not charging you," Brody said, leaning back in his creaking chair, brandishing a firearm, menacing. "I could probably make them stick. But I'm not going to. I've got a dozen sworn statements, and they all tell the same story. You saved that girl's life, and maybe her baby's too." Jax just nodded, sipping the coffee. "But you need to understand something." Brody continued, his eyes serious. "Alistair Blackwood is this town. He owns judges. He sits on the county board. He's got the mayor in his pocket. He will not let this go. His lawyer is already trying to paint you as the villain. He'll sue you into the ground. He'll try to prove you're an unstable drifter with a violent past." He paused. "Do you have a violent past?" "Just the one bull," Jax said quietly. "And a sister I couldn't protect. That's a past I'm trying not to repeat." The simple, honest statement hung in the air. Brody studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Look, my advice to you. Get your truck and get out of Arizona. Disappear. It's the smart play. And what happens to her?" Jax asked, his gaze unflinching. "He gets away with it, doesn't he? He makes her life a living hell until she either gives in or he breaks her." Brody had no answer. They both knew it was the truth. Jax left the station a free man, but he felt a new kind of burden. Leaving now felt like running away again, like leaving Sarah all over again. He walked to the hospital. He found Clara's room and stood hesitantly in the doorway. Leo was there sitting by her bed, his arm draped protectively over her. They both looked up as he entered. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right," Jax said, his voice softer than it had been on the street. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "All right, you saved us. I don't even know your name." "Jax." "Clara," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "And this is Leo." Leo stood up and extended a greasy, calloused hand. "Man, I don't know what to say. The sheriff told me what happened. Thank you isn't a big enough word." "No need," Jax said, giving the hand a firm shake. They talked for a while. Clara, with a newfound strength, told him about her father's plans, the arranged marriage, the complete and total control he wielded. She explained how he had already cut her off, how every institution in the town was beholden to him. "The sheriff told me to leave town," Jax said, his eyes on Clara. "He thinks your father will destroy me." "He will," Clara said, her voice laced with a bitter certainty. "He'll destroy anyone who stands against him. He'll ruin your life, dig up anything he can find and twist it. That's what he does. You should go, Jax. You've already done more than enough. You gave us a chance to get away. We'll take it." Jax looked at the young couple, at their love, their fear, and their fierce desire to protect their unborn child. He saw their vulnerability, and he saw his sister's face, her bruised smile, her misplaced hope that things would get better on their own. No. Jack said the decision, settling in his soul with the weight of an anchor. I'm not running this time. He looked from Clara to Leo. He's counting on us being scared. He's counting on being able to isolate you and bully me out of town. But he's not the only one who can make a plan. A fragile, powerful alliance was forged in that quiet hospital room. The outcast daughter, the working-class mechanic, and the wandering cowboy. 3 disparate people bound together by one man's violence. His real power is his money and his reputation. Jax said, his mind starting to work to strategize. Everything else flows from that. If you take that away, he's just a bully. His reputation is already taking a hit, Leo chimed in. The video of what he did is all over the internet. Someone from the crowd posted it. This was new information. A flicker of hope. Alistair's carefully constructed image was cracking. But his money, Clara said. Blackwood Construction is an empire. Every empire has cracks in its foundation. Jack said, his pale blue eyes hardening with a resolve she hadn't seen before. We just have to find them. He wasn't just a cowboy anymore. He was a protector. And for the first time in 5 years, Jackson Ryder had a reason to stop running. He had a reason to stay and fight. The viral video was the first domino. Shot on a shaky cell phone from across the street, it was grainy and visceral. It captured the raw brutality of the attack, Alistair's distorted, screaming face, Clara's terrified cries, the sickening thud of the kicks, and then the sudden dramatic appearance of Jax and the glint of his revolver. The clip uploaded with the title, "Rich CEO Kicks Pregnant Daughter in Public," exploded. It was picked up by news outlets in Phoenix, then national blogs, then cable news. Alistair Blackwood's carefully manicured reputation was torched in a matter of hours. The narrative spun by his lawyer of a family misunderstanding was laughable in the face of the visual evidence. The board of directors of a national charity he chaired called an emergency meeting and summarily removed him. The Thorne family, mortified by the scandal, formally and very publicly severed all ties, killing the multi-million-dollar merger Alistair had built his future on. In Prescott Creek, the tide of public opinion so long held in check by fear began to turn. People who had once crossed the street to greet Alistair now averted their eyes. Whispers followed him everywhere. The story of his public brutality gave courage to others who had been silently victimized by his ruthlessness over the years, contractors he'd bankrupted with lawsuits, employees he'd fired on a whim town, officials he'd bullied into submission. This public humiliation, however, didn't humble Alistair. It made him more dangerous. Like a cornered animal, he lashed out. His lawyer filed a multi-million-dollar civil suit against Jax for assault and emotional distress, a clear tactic of intimidation. He also tried to pressure the district attorney, a man he'd helped get elected, to drop the felony charges against him and pursue charges against Jax instead. But the DA, facing immense public scrutiny from the video, was forced to act impartially. He announced he was pursuing the case against Alistair to the fullest extent of the law. Meanwhile, the strange alliance of 3 was at work. Leo, using his network of working-class friends, plumbers, electricians, foremen, began to quietly ask questions about Blackwood Construction. These were the men who had poured the concrete and wired the buildings. They knew things. They spoke of cutting corners, of using substandard materials on city projects, of invoices that didn't quite add up. But they were too scared to speak up officially. Jax, drawing on a lifetime of reading people, focused on Alistair's inner circle. He found a disgruntled former accountant, a man named Gerald Finney, who had been forcibly retired a year ago. Jax found him fishing at a lake 50 miles away, a man simmering with quiet resentment. After 3 days of patient, non-threatening conversation, Gerald began to talk. He spoke of a creative accounting system, of 2 sets of books, one for the IRS and the shareholders, and another more accurate set that showed a company deeply in debt, propped up by fraudulent loans and inflated asset valuations. The Thorn merger hadn't been a plan for expansion. It had been a desperate lifeline to prevent a total collapse. The key, Gerald said, was Alistair's wife, Eleanor. She was required to co-sign on many of the major corporate loans. She might not understand what she was signing, but her signature would be on everything. This was the crack in the foundation Jax had been looking for. Getting to Eleanor was the hardest part. She was holed up in the mansion, a prisoner of her husband's paranoia and rage. But Clara knew a way. She knew the schedule of the housekeeper who had worked for them for 20 years, a kind woman named Maria. One afternoon, while Alistair was meeting with his lawyers, Clara, with Leo, waiting in the car down the road, went to the house. She didn't go to the front door. She went to the back to the kitchen entrance, where Maria let her in her eyes, full of tears and sympathy. The confrontation with her mother was heartbreaking. Eleanor was terrified, a pale, trembling woman lost in the opulent prison her husband had built. "You have to leave, Clara, if he finds you here. He destroyed our lives, Mother. He tried to kill my baby, and you just stood there." Clara said, her voice not accusatory, but filled with a profound sadness. "All my life you just stood there and let him." The words struck Eleanor like a physical blow. The truth of them was undeniable. "What could I do?" Eleanor whispered, wringing her hands. He is who he is." "You can do something now." Clara pressed her voice, urgent. "Mr. Finney, the old accountant, told us about the loans, about the documents you signed. Mum, the whole company is a lie. He's not just a monster, he's a criminal. And he's going to drag you down with him when it all collapses." Clara painted a picture for her mother of a future where she was either complicit in her husband's crimes or free from him. It was a stark choice. For the first time in 30 years, a spark of self-preservation, of long-buried defiance, flickered within Eleanor Blackwood. That night, while Alistair slept, Eleanor crept into his study, her hands shaking so violently she could barely work the combination. She opened the safe, hidden behind a false bookshelf. Inside, beneath piles of stock certificates and deeds, was a ledger and a folder of documents. She didn't understand them, but she recognized her own signature on page after page. She took them. The next morning, she packed a single suitcase, called a taxi, and left the mansion. She met Clara and Jax in a lawyer's office in Flagstaff, a lawyer they had found who had no connection to Prescott Creek. When Alistair woke up to find his wife gone and his secret ledger missing, his rage was volcanic. He knew exactly what had happened. He knew he was ruined. His desperation led him to make his final fatal mistake. He called Leo. "You think you've won, you little grease monkey," Alistair snarled into the phone. "You think you can take my daughter, my family. I'm going to bury you. I'm going to plant evidence in that filthy garage of yours so you spend the next 20 years in a cage. You'll never see that bastard child of yours." But Leo had been expecting something like this. On the advice of their new lawyer, he had a recording app active on his phone. The entire threat, the explicit plan to frame him, was captured in crystal-clear audio. The end came with breathtaking speed. The house of cards Alistair Blackwood had built over 3 decades collapsed in on itself in less than a week. Eleanor Blackwood's testimony, corroborated by the meticulous and damning documents from the safe and the expert analysis of Gerald Finney, was a bombshell. She presented the evidence to the Arizona Attorney General's office. An immediate full-scale investigation was launched into Blackwood Construction for bank fraud, wire fraud, and racketeering. Simultaneously, Leo turned the recording of Alistair's threat over to Sheriff Brody. The evidence of witness tampering and conspiracy to frame him was undeniable. It was the final nail in the coffin, stripping away any last shred of credibility Alistair might have had. On a cool Thursday morning, a fleet of black SUVs with government plates descended on the Blackwood building in Prescott Creek. FBI agents working in tandem with state investigators raided the offices, seizing servers' files and computers. The employees could only watch in shock as the myth of their company's invincibility dissolved before their eyes. The final scene of the drama took place not on a public street, but at the gates of Alistair's mansion. As he tried to flee in his Lincoln, his path was blocked by Sheriff Brody's cruiser and 2 FBI vehicles. There was no gun this time, no shouting, just the cold, quiet professionalism of the law. As Brody read him his rights, a laundry list of state and federal charges, from felony assault to massive financial fraud, Alistair Blackwood finally looked broken. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, vacant emptiness. The power he had worshipped his entire life had abandoned him. He was just a man in an expensive shirt, his empire turning to dust around him. The news of his arrest and the scale of his crimes sent shock waves through the community. The town of Prescott Creek was forced to confront the dark truth it had ignored for so long. Its prosperity was built on a foundation of lies propped up by a bully they had all been too afraid to challenge. In the end, Alistair Blackwood pleaded guilty to a host of charges to avoid a prolonged, humiliating trial. He was sentenced to 15 years in a federal prison. His assets were seized to pay off a fraction of his monumental debts. The Blackwood name, once a symbol of power, became a synonym for disgrace. 6 months later, spring had come to the valley. Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Jackson. Clara, with the inheritance she received after her mother divorced Alistair and liquidated her personal assets, didn't flee Arizona. She stayed. She bought a small plot of land outside of town and finally pursued her dream, starting a nursery specializing in native desert plants. Leo's garage, now his own, was busier than ever, his reputation for honesty making him the most trusted mechanic in the county. And Jack's rider finally stopped running. The reward money offered by the banks for information leading to the conviction in the fraud case was substantial. He used it to buy a small ranch a few miles from Clara and Leo's place. He was raising a few head of cattle, his days filled with the simple hard work he'd always known. The ghost of his sister still walked with him, but now it was a peaceful companionship, not a haunting. He had finally found his atonement. One sunny afternoon, Clara and Leo brought baby Jackson to visit his namesake. They sat on the porch of his modest ranch house, watching the sun set over the mesas. The baby gurgled happily in Jax's arms, his tiny hand wrapped around the cowboy's calloused finger. They weren't bound by violence anymore. They were bound by something stronger, a strange, improvised family forged in a moment of terror and redeemed by a shared act of courage. In the quiet of the evening, they had found something none of them had before: a home, a future, and a profound, unshakable peace. What began as a brutal act of violence on a sun-baked street ended with the total collapse of a corrupt empire. It's a stark reminder that true power isn't found in wealth or influence, but in the courage to stand up for what's right, even when you're standing alone. Clara found the strength to defy a monster, and Jax, a wandering stranger haunted by his past, found his redemption by refusing to be a bystander. Their story shows us that karma, though sometimes slow, is often inescapable, and that even in the darkest of moments, the bravery of one or two good people can change everything. If this story of courage and consequence resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of justice being served. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will restore your faith in the power of the human spirit. In the comments below, let us know, what does the word justice truly mean to you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching.